In 2026, Formula One changed in a way that had nothing to do with horsepower and everything to do with code. The sport's new hybrid regulations gave every car a battery system capable of delivering up to 350 kilowatts through the MGUK, with the older MGUH unit removed entirely from the power unit architecture. This meant electrical deployment was no longer a supporting factor in lap time, it became roughly half of the car's total output. How a team's software decided to release that stored energy, corner by corner, second by second, became as important as the combustion engine sitting underneath it. For Ferrari, this software layer turned a season-long structural weakness into a race-winning weapon at a track where nobody, including the team itself, expected it to work. That track was Spa-Francorchamps, host of the 2026 Belgian Grand Prix. Spa's layout is dominated by long, full-throttle sections. The Kemmel Straight alone stretches for over a kilometer at maximum speed, feeding directly into the high-speed complex of Les Combes. Going into the weekend, Ferrari's own engineers rated Spa as a harder test than Silverstone, precisely because the SF20 SIX's known straight-line deficit would be exposed for a longer continuous stretch than almost anywhere else on the calendar. Team principal Fred Vasseur confirmed this concern directly before the race weekend even began, referencing the team's earlier struggles at the Red Bull Ring. "We still have a deficit of performance, this we know. And for sure it's more difficult when you are going to Silverstone than when you are going to Monaco." Spa, with straights even longer than Silverstone's, was expected to punish the deficit further. The result on Sunday contradicted the forecast entirely. Charles Leclerc finished P2, ahead of four-time champion Max Verstappen, who took third for Red Bull. Lewis Hamilton recovered to P4, despite serving a 5-second time penalty for a first-lap collision with George Russell, an incident that ended the Mercedes driver's race on the opening lap and brought out the safety car. Leclerc had started the race from a strong grid position, passed Verstappen on the opening laps, and then used a well-timed pit stop under a virtual safety car to briefly take the race lead before Kimi Antonelli reclaimed it late in the race to win by 1.952 seconds. After the checkered flag, Vasseur did not hide his own surprise at how the weekend had unfolded. "I think overall, it's a very strong result for the team. We were not expecting this kind of result at Silverstone and Spa due to the layout of the track," he told F1 TV. "We had good results. I think overall as a team, we did a good job with execution, good strategy, good pit stop. What changed at Spa was not only the code running inside the SF26, it was how Ferrari approached the entire race weekend as a process. Rather than arriving with a fixed setup philosophy and running through a rehearsed script across 3 practice sessions, the team began treating each session as an opportunity to adjust, test, and rebuild incrementally, carrying learnings from 1 hour of track time directly into the next." Vasseur described this shift in almost identical language after the British Grand Prix a fortnight earlier. "We did a small step by small step all over the weekend to have a strong pace today." This approach mirrors one that Red Bull had used through the second half of the 2025 season, prioritizing continuous in-weekend development over a single locked-in plan carried from the factory. At Spa, Vasseur reinforced this mentality once more, treating every circuit as a fresh problem rather than an extension of the previous round. "We have to start from scratch every single weekend." The mechanism underneath this shift in approach is energy deployment software. Before a race weekend even begins, teams pre-program exactly where on a lap the battery should discharge its stored electrical energy and where the car should recover charge instead, sector by sector, corner by corner, sometimes even meter by meter along a straight. This deployment map is not a setting the driver adjusts live from the cockpit. It is calculated in advance by engineers working from simulation data, and then refined continuously as the car gathers real information across each practice session. The system effectively learns the characteristics of the specific track layout and adapts its deployment strategy accordingly, rather than applying a generic template built for an average circuit. For the driver, this creates a distinctly strange sensation behind the wheel. Power can arrive earlier than expected on corner exit, or cut out mid-corner, largely independent of how hard the accelerator pedal is actually pressed. Vasseur explained the scale of this challenge specifically at Spa, where the long straights made any deployment miscalculation immediately visible in lap time. "There is still a lot to do in terms of energy management. We noticed enormous differences in speed from one car to another and even from one straight to another. Behind this software puzzle sits a hardware deficit that Ferrari has been unable to fully resolve through code alone." The FIA's Performance Index, used to determine which manufacturers qualify for mid-season development tokens, rated Ferrari's power unit as much as 4 adrift of the benchmark internal combustion unit for the 2026 season. In practical terms, this has translated into a real-world power gap estimated at close to 25 to 30 horsepower compared to Mercedes W17 on the straights, a figure that Ferrari's own engineers acknowledged publicly earlier in the season. Vasseur has been direct about why simulation alone cannot fix this gap once the cars are actually on track. You can run simulations forever, but now we are in reality. We have to understand how to use the energy during the race, when to attack and when to defend. It will be one of the key elements of the weekend. Vasseur has also been precise, on multiple occasions, about exactly where this trade-off actually lives within the car's overall performance window. He has repeatedly stated that the qualifying gap to Mercedes is tied specifically to power unit characteristics that chassis setup changes alone cannot fully erase, regardless of how the mechanical balance is adjusted. Speaking to Italian press, quoted through outlets tracking the team closely, Vasseur summarized the pattern that had by then repeated across multiple rounds. It's a trend from the beginning of the season that we are probably a bit more performant in the race than in qualifying, but it's not only due to the engine. That single sentence effectively describes Ferrari's entire competitive shape through the first half of 2026, a team consistently weaker on Saturdays and consistently stronger on Sundays. The pattern repeated at Melbourne early in the season, then resurfaced at Silverstone, and appeared again at Spa, Ferrari losing meaningful time in qualifying against Mercedes' one-lap pace, then clawing much of that deficit back over a full Grand Prix distance through tyre management and race day energy strategy. Notably, this specific race day advantage has not transferred evenly across every team running comparable equipment. McLaren, which also uses Mercedes power units, has not extracted the same magnitude of race pace gains from broadly similar hardware as Ferrari has managed with the SF26. This detail underlines an important distinction. The advantage Ferrari has built lies specifically in its own deployment software, tyre management approach, and chassis setup philosophy, not simply in the engine badge fitted to the back of the car. Two teams running the same power unit architecture can still arrive at very different race day outcomes depending on how their respective software teams choose to program the deployment map and how their chassis engineers balance tyre preservation against outright pace. None of this happened without dedicated chassis and aerodynamic work specific to the demands of Spa-Francorchamps. Engineers tuned ride height to balance the circuit's unusual mix of high-speed corners and surface undulations through sectors like Eau Rouge and Rydillon, where a car running too low risks bottoming out under compression at speed. Suspension stiffness was adjusted to manage that same compression through the uphill Rydillon complex without sacrificing straight-line stability on the Kemmel straight that follows almost immediately afterward. Rear aerodynamic load was deliberately trimmed to reduce drag across the circuit's long full-throttle sections, a decision that accepted reduced downforce through the technical final sector in exchange for higher top speed where it mattered most for both qualifying and overtaking opportunities on Sunday. Before a single wheel turned in FP1, Ferrari's simulator team worked extensively to correlate predicted lap data against these specific setup choices, so that the limited on-track running available across the weekend could confirm the right operating window rather than spend valuable sessions searching for it from scratch. The broader championship picture, despite the strong Spa weekend, still favors Mercedes by a considerable margin. In the constructors' standings, Ferrari sits second with 307 points, trailing Mercedes 379, a gap of 72 points with roughly a dozen rounds remaining in the season. In the drivers' standings, Hamilton holds second place, 50 points behind championship leader Kimi Antonelli, while Leclerc sits further back in the order despite his own strong results across the year. Ferrari's technical response to the underlying power deficit is a second major power unit upgrade under the FIA's ADUO, additional development and update opportunities framework, a mechanism that grants manufacturers found to be below the grid's performance benchmark the right to introduce in-season engine upgrades outside the normal homologation freeze. Ferrari's package is centered on a redesigned turbocharger featuring additional blades, aimed at improving efficiency and acceleration in higher rev ranges. It is scheduled to debut at Monza, Ferrari's home race, and represents the final internal combustion and turbo specification that Hamilton and Leclerc will run in power-critical events for the remainder of the year, with an older specification potentially retained for less demanding circuits. Vasseur has already limited public expectations for what this upgrade will actually achieve once it arrives. Asked directly whether the ADUO package would allow Ferrari to fully close the gap to Mercedes, his answer was unambiguous: completely catch Mercedes. I would say no. It will help, that is certain. When you look at Mercedes and Red Bull, we are talking about a difference of 1 or 2 tenths per lap from the engine. In any case, it is not a major advantage to make up. Assessing Ferrari's first half of 2026 as a whole, Vasuri used a school report analogy that has since been repeated across Italian and French motorsport media covering the team closely. It's a bit like a school report, good, but could have done better. What we're showing in 2026 is a step forward compared to 2025, because we're more competitive. The car is pretty good, which wasn't a given for the first year under new regulations. But Mercedes is still well ahead, at least as far as the engine is concerned. It was to be expected that we'd have a tough year with the power unit. What Spa ultimately demonstrated is that Ferrari's in-weekend mentality shift, combined with continuous refinement of its energy deployment software and a chassis capable of managing both high-speed stability through Eau Rouge and Rydillen and tire preservation across a full race distance, produced consistent, repeatable results at a circuit where the SF20 SIXS core power deficit should theoretically have been most exposed, rather than least. That underlying power deficit remains structurally unresolved heading into the second half of the 2026 season, with Monza's turbocharger upgrade positioned as the next real test of whether software refinement and chassis strength can continue compensating for what the engine alone still cannot deliver.